At the bottom of our garden was a gate that led into the woods. There was a lot of bracken and a lot of smells, and it was quite dangerous because we didn't know who owned it. We think some parts of the wood were owned by the farmer. It didn't necessarily seem mysterious, more adventurous, and that what we were doing was rebellious. We used to build little camps. There were odd things about it. There was a circle of trees. I used to call it the fairy circle. It looked like it was a particular type of tree. And there was a clearing of grass, a big patch of grass in the middle of it. And then there was what looked like the remnants of some kind of vineyard, which was weird, even though it had been there for a couple of 100 years at least. A strange place that just didn't fit together. I used to go in there with me dog, and as kids, as a gang. And at the back of the house there was farmland as well, but they had big crops. We used to sometimes go in there too, but the woods did a kind of big semicircle over the big field and up and over another field as well. There was a huge pond, and that had stories. The village that I grew up in had poets, so there were lots of strange stories going around. People falling out of trees, and trees dying, that kind of stuff. Because there were no paths as such, you could never find the same spot again. At least I didn't think I could. And all the fence that surrounded it was all the same. There wasn't anything particular different about parts of the woods, to know where you were, unless you were at the fairy circle, and that was close to my house. Also, there were quite similar species of trees too, though there was one part of the wood, quite far away, that was planted with pine trees, tall and dark compared to the rest of the wood. I moved here when I was 6, so I didn't really know how to navigate a space. I used to sometimes go with me dog and me brother. They'd just follow the noses. I don't really remember a lot, but I do remember making a half-hearted attempt at a camp. But later we discovered that some people had done that further away, so we adopted those slightly. Took them on. Our dog used to drag huge branches, like mini trees, around the woods. We used to have to get out of the way, or else they would smack your knees. We made up stuff about the farmer, because we were convinced we saw him with an axe running through the woods. But I don't think we did. He did have this leftover bit of pigsty, and I'm pretty sure we saw him in there. And there was all these stories about him not being a nice person, like he lived in one of the big houses and didn't spend any money, and was a really miserly person. But I'm sure we all made it up. We went to the woods every day when I was a kid. When we were kids, we'd go there in the morning, but we'd have to come in for lunch and dinner, which was annoying. We would then be out there till bedtime. When we got older, we noticed the seasons, the nature of the woods, the colour of the leaves. Much later, I still took our dog there. The road here is very different to my wood. Here is more dense, and there is a lot more on the ground. Ours was full of ferns, so a lot softer. We could even sleep on it. We never saw any markings on the trees in our wood. There was no conservation until I went back and took our dog again. I took my girls, who grew up in a town. They had no idea what a woods is. We'd taken them to parks, but I thought they have to see them. They have to experience the woods as a kid. And I took them there, and they were so freaked out by it. Made them so unsettled. But so did I, because there were paths and roads put in near the bit, where I used to live. And then I noticed that they'd put up plaques. And what I hadn't noticed, or known as a kid, was that these certain little streamways that I imagined as huge rivers that I used to try and jump across was actually the markings of a wall of a building that was over 1,000 years old. And it was some kind of manor that they now conserved. So now you can visit it officially. And the vineyard bit and the circle of trees was obviously deliberately planted and was hundreds of years old. It was really disappointing seeing the kids see it. They would have seen it similar to me and my brother's age. To them it was too dark and too enclosed. I thought we'd go for a good long walk, but they were just like, okay, we've seen that, let's go then. They weren't getting it at all. I was so excited to show them though. Being a village as well, there are a lot of derelict buildings. Not just farm buildings, but also huge buildings with thatched roofs that were too expensive to run. Just left. We used to explore them as well. There was one that was all rotten and stuff. We found like in a shed and in part of the house as well, like old furniture and cufflinks and stuff like that. I'd never camp in the woods. The idea that somebody else had built those camps, it scared us and it plays on you. Who was that? And are they in there now? We were intrigued by them though, just like a big tree that had fallen in a storm. You want to have a look, you want to have a good look at them. We never stayed there too long though. We had a good look at them and play for a bit, but they could have turned up at any moment. Here, we usually just stick to the main track. It's nice to get off the gravel. It makes a nicer sound. The nice thing about our woods was you always had the feeling, although you found these disused camps, that there might be someone around. But other than that, it was pretty much our wood. You could access it at other points around the semicircle, from different places, like at the back of the pond. There were very few people who accessed it though. They changed the space and how you navigated it. It was a little bit strange because I was seeing it from a different angle, from paths. And before any of that existed, you felt like you could roam. So that made me feel a little bit sad. It seemed such a shame. I went to other woods recently, and it was a shock to see things thrown everywhere, like a dumping ground. The woods changed quite a lot here. This bit feels like a proper wood, like my childhood wood. A lot of people see the wood as magical, but to me, because I spent a lot of time in one, it felt very real. I find it hard to connect to more airy-fairy stories, like trees talking. The trees didn't talk to me. They dropped their branches on my head if I stood and stared at them long enough. If I spend too much time in a quiet environment like this, I get the feeling that my life is going on elsewhere. I get very itchy feet if I stay somewhere for too long. These woods feel like private property to me, a bit like our woods. The farmer tried to sell off the woods for a housing development. Luckily, all the residents, including me mum, were up in arms about it. You can't sell off the woods. In the end, luckily, he could only sell off a small plot of land. It's a really old village with loads of history and traditions.